My name is Otto Habeck. I'm based in Hamburg at the University of Hamburg. And in my previous life, I've been a student of geography, and then I had a 10 years period of working in the United Kingdom as a PhD student in social anthropology at Cambridge University, and then also at the University of Aberdeen. So I've been exposed to Siberian anthropology and anthropology of the North before then taking up the post of coordinator for the Siberian Studies Center at the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Halle in Germany, and that was in 2003. And since 2014, I'm a full professor at the University of Hamburg. Regarding my background as a geographer, I'm very happy and excited to work in this project with colleagues from environmental and natural sciences, and also with colleagues from biology. Yes, I've been studying the practice of reindeer herding and also the image and the history of reindeer herding in one particular area in northeastern Europe, right next, you could say, to the Ural Mountains. And I conducted fieldwork there in 1997, 8, and 99, with some follow-up visits in the 2000s. Because Komi reindeer herders and Nenets reindeer herders, they constantly and continually, they go across the administrative borders north to south. And so it's not always easy to actually figure out if a reindeer herding family is rather Nenets or rather Komi. So there's a lot of mingling. I've been to the town of Vodbuta in 2017, conducting a workshop there on the interaction of permafrost and reindeer husbandry, or you could say permafrost dynamics and renewable forms of land use. And this pretty much connects with the core content of the charter project,
right,
which is going to start now in August 2020. I hope you can see this screen.
Yes.
And this is about the overall outline of the charter project. Universität Hamburg is mainly responsible for work package number 3, which has the short title Socio-economic impacts. I'm also involved in other work packages such as number 2 about changing grazing regimes, and also number 6, which deals with community involvement, stakeholder involvement, also co-designing research together with local land users, including indigenous and local communities. And work package 6 is more about what steps to be taken in the future and what could mitigation or adaptation be about. What does it mean for local land users? And there's also work package number 5, to which my team and we are going to contribute what I call parameters in the language of modeling. So we may not be able to provide hard facts and figures for all what the modelers want, but at least what we can do is we can point the way which parameters or which variables to be included in their in their modeling. So this is how I would describe my own role, and more particularly or specifically about this work package 3, socio-economic impacts. Now, I think the philosophy of the whole charter project is to say that the landscapes in subarctic regions, including the tundra and the forest landscapes, one may think that these are very sort of pristine and natural landscapes, but in fact, I would describe them along with other colleagues as cultural landscapes. And in that sense, the local population has been contributing to what we see as the current shape of those landscapes. And if we speak more closely about pastoralism or herding, reindeer herding, and other forms of animal husbandry, these have exerted some influence on the vegetation directly, and they've exerted some either direct or indirect influence on also permafrost underground. So I think one of the main messages here is, and this is one of the working hypotheses, it is not just a one-way road of climate change towards socio-economic conditions and so-called traditional livelihoods, but there's also the other way around, or the causal connection goes the other way too, which means that local communities do have some influence on the shape of the local landscape. For example, by reindeer herding. And since such activities of land use, including reindeer herding and also extractive industries and so on, since they are all influenced by political decisions and by some economic parameters like markets and prices and demands, one may say that these socio-economic factors also interact with the development of the landscape through, and here's the linkage or the link, through different forms of land use. That's right, and I would say to varying degree or to a different extent depending on the region. For example, if we speak about permafrost, then if you compare different regions across Eurasia, we did that for Mongolia and for central Yakutia, the Republic of Sakha, and we also did that for the Northern Urals, which is closer to the Charter region. And we find that different forms of pastoral land use actually interact with permafrost differently. With Eastern Siberia, the one region where permafrost degradation in previous millennia has actually resulted in a landscape that was pretty amenable or had good preconditions for grazing cattle. And it is over the last 200, 300 years that pastoralists in that region actually keep those permafrost degradation landscapes open. And by that, they sort of, they contribute to shaping the landscape, which has originally been a permafrost dynamic landscape, but they keep it open in certain ways and interact with it. And if we go closer to the Charter project area, Vorkuta, we see that the so-called traditional livelihoods are actually a major driver in vegetation and vegetation change. And by that also albedo change and snow compression and other things that are decisive when we talk about climate change in the Arctic and its regional effects. Yes, they keep the landscape open by preventing, you could say, the growth of shrubs and trees. That's correct. Now, these open landscapes are like islands in the forest. In the case of Sakha, Yakutia, the forest is on top of ice-rich ground with, you could say, a very clear permafrost profile. But if I go into these island areas, which are like little basins, or well, comparatively large or small basins within that forested landscape, there the permafrost table has gone down. Lakes have developed, and then those lakes by desiccation and the drying up of the landscape then turned into meadows, and these meadows can be used by the pastoralists. This is a kind of process that differs quite starkly from what we see in the Charter region, where different dynamics lead to the keeping open the landscape through a snow compression and you could say reindeer control over shrub growth. Yeah. So the processes and the factors are different from region to region. Taken from the Charter project description, and this deals with different processes in different seasons. And I think what is crucial here is the notion of albedo, or the extent of light or energy which is being reflected from the surface back into the atmosphere. And depending on the landscape, if it is an open landscape with, for example, lots of snow in the winter, a rather treeless landscape, then reflection will be high. And if it is forested or if there are many shrubs, then the reflection of sunlight will be low, which leads to an increase of the temperature. Well, first in the snow, and thawing snow will then also result in warmer temperatures in the upper soil. This has an effect on the permafrost underneath. Now, with herbivory or with grazing of reindeer, in the winter, actually what you usually get is an open landscape. Little bushes or the shrubs are actually very low. They are not tall. And if you keep the reindeer out, as it is done in some areas, the trees and the shrubs can grow. What we understand the general mechanism. What we don't understand are the specifics of which shrubs and which trees act in which ways, also on the soil and the permafrost underneath. Interestingly, in the summer, these processes are quite different and somehow contrasting. So if for the winter you could say low albedo or low reflection of sunlight corresponds with low grazing, and high reflection of sunlight or albedo means high or is dependent, relates to high levels of grazing, then in the summer it seems to work the other way around, with low albedo translating into high herbivory and low herbivory into high albedo. So now what we want to find out is how exactly these processes work, how reindeer herders describe these processes from their point of view, and if different grazing regimes and political and economic decisions about reindeer herding, how they interact with the development of the landscape, and then how they interact with things like reflection of energy, the temperature in the ground, and degradation of or the continuation of permafrost. You could say the overall content of different work packages, including the one on changing grazing regimes at local and regional scales and transitions in land cover. So I would say that this work package number 3 on socio-economic impacts has to work closely with number 1 and 2, which you can see here. Concerning future strategies and discussions with reindeer herders and other land users, that will happen under work package number 6, which is called narratives, or you could say scenarios of future development and policy options. And here there's some sort of work division between number 3 and 6. Both will conduct workshops in the research regions of Charter, including Russia, including Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And whereas work package 6 will organize such workshops and stakeholder interaction in the Nordic countries, work package 3 will be responsible for doing that in Russia, to the extent that we can do that under current conditions of pandemic restrictions. It's indeed difficult to say. We plan to have these stakeholder workshops twice during the whole duration of the project. And initially we thought it would be good to have it like in March 2021, so that's March next year. And that seems to be quite difficult under current conditions. So we may need to postpone that to September, October, November 21 for the first round of meetings. Having said that, there is actually one project member who currently works on Yamal Peninsula, Northwest Siberia, and who stays with the reindeer herders and migrates with the reindeer herders on Yamal Peninsula. His name is Florian Stammler, and he's one of the team members along with Rosa Laptander and Kirill Istomin. And the latter are, they actually grew up in the region that we study, with Kirill Istomin being a colleague from the Komi Science Center. He speaks Komi, and Rosa Laptander being herself, she grew up in a Nenets community. She speaks Nenets, and by that we also want to, and I believe that we can, that we have the opportunity to interact with local stakeholders in their own languages, which I believe is important to build up trust. Yes, and this is also very important in the light of our strategy to actually design the different steps within the project with local stakeholders and with local land and resource users. So while the project, the Charter project, is starting in August 2020, there are some steps, milestones, and deliverables where we have to and want to discuss with people in Yamal, in Lappi, and elsewhere, how to go about that best and how to do it in the most suitable and reasonable way. Yeah, I see that interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary work may appear to be a challenge, but then on the other hand, I personally don't see it that way, because in previous projects that were also funded by the European Commission, I got used to working with meteorologists, with biologists. I also witnessed the methods they use during their own fieldwork and campaigns, you could say, again, rather far north in the tundra, using helicopters and stuff. And so I believe it is important if representatives of different scientific disciplines actually observe each other during fieldwork and during research, in order to learn something about the methods applied and the methods being used, but also perhaps on what you could call the production of knowledge, how it actually occurs in different spheres, and how it is connected with being rather close or rather far off from the centers where political decisions are being taken. And I see my role as a social anthropologist to also, what's the English word, to navigate or also to migrate between those spaces. So part of the work for work package 3 will be compiling statistics. It will be compiling maps about land use, like which reindeer herding enterprise is going to or has the permit or the right to graze their reindeer where. And all these data, or collecting such data, automatically leads me and team members to go to the capitals, regional capitals, in order to collect such material. And yet, simultaneously, we also will be working with reindeer herding families at the very spaces or in those locations where they graze their reindeer. And we are going to work to some extent with members of other work packages with a very different disciplinary background to find out more about what they or how they go about fieldwork. This is an example of the kind of data that is relevant for this work package 3. This is not the only source of data, but it is one source of data. Different reindeer herding enterprises have been allocated or assigned different herding routes and territories where they can graze their animals. And well, strangely enough, it seems that some corridors are empty, but in fact, those corridors that are shown in color with summer pastures in green at the Kara Sea shore, and winter pastures in purple, blue in the south in the forested area. These have been allocated by the authorities of the Republic of Komi. And those in between, the white ones, are under the, you could say, jurisdiction of what up to now is called the Nenets Autonomous Area. So this is an example of herding management and an example of how agricultural ministries and officials and administrators interact with reindeer herders. And one particular area is that one here around the town of Vorkuta, where also private herding goes on in a very big way. And those who have been assigned pasture and territories are in constant, you could say, trouble or even conflict with those private reindeer herders who actually don't give a, what is the English expression? They don't pay attention at all to those officially established migration routes. Mm. So even among reindeer herders, there can be quite a deal of conflict on resource use and land use. That's true, which also means we have to, well, perhaps validate or corroborate to what extent such data, official data, such as maps or numbers of reindeer per enterprise, how much they actually correspond with reality on the ground, you might say. I must confess, this is a quite old picture, which was taken about 22 years ago. And this also means that within the Charter project, my personal aim would be to follow up on those communities that I used to live with back in the late 1990s. Now, since you were asking about how I got into that, you could say, part of or domain of research, as a geographer who grew up in the west of Germany, but also with a familial background with many relatives in the east of Germany, there was a constant, you could say, estrangement or some sort of odd feeling about the way how the Soviet Union is represented in media. For me, as a student in geography, this was a main incentive to actually travel to the Soviet Union, where I happened to be back in 1990 when it still existed. And then also to follow those processes of what back in those years, what was called transformation to a market capitalist order of things. And there was actually very little information indeed in West German media on the way people in the different parts of Siberia or the Russian North, how they actually earned their livelihood or earned their living and their everyday lives. There were scarce reports on that. And I think there's a generation of social anthropologists, not just from Germany, but also from other European countries and from the United States and also from Canada, who found that the 1990s were a period when traveling to the former Soviet Union and to the north of Russia became suddenly very easy and suddenly very interesting. And so one could say that this matched or intersected with a very outspoken political movement of indigenous rights, and some would say neo-traditionalism, and you could say political voices demanding more rights and more acknowledgement of different ways of life among indigenous peoples of the north and of Siberia. So in that sense, things really intersected, and that was actually the incentive for doing fieldwork in different parts of Siberia and also Mongolia throughout the 90s. With this being the longest field research project for myself, when I stayed 1 year with reindeer herders and their families, and also the administrators and the reindeer herding enterprises. So yeah, that was the basis for that. Yeah, this is the month of May.
Mm.
Some newborn calves should be around, but rather distant from this herd, which is the herd for draft animals.
Yeah, right.
But the draft animals are actually quite tame or quite domesticated. And well, they all have ear marks, but also the herders can tell which animal is which animal.
Yeah, of
And
course.
some animals look at you saying, as if saying, all right, so I know it's going to be you who's going to put me in front of the sledge today. Yeah. This perhaps it sounds a bit naff, but this is some kind of interaction, human-animal interaction, which I thought, again, it's not just herders controlling the animals, but it's also animals sort of interacting with the herders themselves.